So based on that, thousands had to be.
Brett Favre has made some headlines in the football world after stating on a recent radio show that he believes he suffered thousands of concussions during his NFL career. Welcome back, everybody. I'm Dr. Brian Sutterer, and on this channel, my goal is to teach you about sports medicine. A couple of days ago, Brett Favre did an interview on the Bubba the Love Sponge show. I don't know what that means. That's just the name of the show. I'll link it down below in the description, but he made some headlines talking about the number of concussions he's received in his career. Let's take a listen and walk through this conversation, and hopefully I can provide you some more educational insight on the things he's talking about.
How many times do you think you were concussed? 100?
Well, no, way more than that. See, the thing about concussions is we still don't know a lot about them. But if you'd asked me this 10 years ago, how many concussions I've had, I'd have said 3.
3 is the number of concussions Brett Favre would have been formally diagnosed with. And as we'll get to here in a minute, diagnosing a concussion is actually sometimes pretty darn challenging. And so 3 is presumably just the number where the medical staff said, yep, you've been diagnosed, you have an official concussion, and we're going to put you through the protocol.
The reason I would have said 3, I thought concussions were when you get knocked out, where you black out for a period of time, you don't know where you are, memory loss, dizzy. A boxer gets knocked out, he tries to get up, his legs are rubber. That's a concussion.
Right.
This is a great point that Brett makes, and unfortunately still something that's pretty pervasive in the sports world. A lot of people still think that in order to have a concussion, you must have been knocked out. Basically, they have to go hand in hand. And no matter how bad your head hurts, no matter how hard you were hit, if you weren't knocked out, it's not a concussion. That's not at all true, as we'll talk about. That's definitely sort of the old school thinking with concussions, and unfortunately led to a lot of misdiagnoses.
What we now know is concussions happen all the time. So like you get tackled and your head hits the turf and you see flashes of light or ringing in your ears, but you're able to play.
Or you get that stinger, that little stinger for 5 or 6 seconds.
That's a concussion. So based on that, thousands had to be, because every time my head hit the turf, there was ringing or stars going, flash bulbs, but I was still able to play.
It's hard to really wrap your head around what Brett is describing here, because in the literature, in all of our textbooks and teachings, we're used to thinking of concussions as something that a medical provider evaluated you for and said, yes, you are diagnosed with a concussion. On the other end of the spectrum, we talk about these repetitive subconcussive blows, meaning head impacts that don't rise to the severity of causing a concussion that over time can build up and potentially cause long-term problems like CTE. But we really don't hear athletes talk often about repetitive, symptomatic, time after time episodes like this, how Farve is saying he's had thousands of these concussions. And so it's honestly a little bit of a shock to hear him talk about it this way, but something that I think we have to completely take at face value for what he's saying. In the real world, a lot of times we're trying to almost get the information out of the athlete because they don't want to come out of the game. They don't want to talk about their symptoms. And so you're trying to ask them questions and perform these tests to discover if they've had a concussion, as opposed to them being forthcoming with the information and saying, I have all of these symptoms, my head hurts after this impact, in which case it's much easier to make that decision and say, yes, you've had a concussion. So even though all these instances Favre is describing were not diagnosed by the medical staff as concussions, if we think about what a concussion is and how we diagnose them, he's almost making the diagnosis for us. First of all, the diagnosis of a concussion is a clinical diagnosis, meaning there's no blood test that's widely accepted, there's no brain scan, there's no CT scan. There's nothing that you can look at and say positive, negative, clear, objective, there is a concussion or there is not. It's a clinical diagnosis, meaning we rely on a number of different tools for that individual healthcare provider or doctor to make that diagnosis. So because that's the nature of concussions, you end up with a lot of variety in terms of what people may consider to have been a concussion. So when Brett describes one set of symptoms as being clear concussions, in his mind, somebody like AJ Hawk, who might have felt similar things, may not consider those to have been concussions. Most people will say that a concussion is when there has been some direct or indirect blow to the head that results in signs and or symptoms of a traumatic brain injury that can't be explained by some other cause. Direct meaning helmet to helmet, punch directly to the head, versus indirect, you get hit in the body and you just have some sort of whiplash that basically moves your brain within the skull. Then signs and or symptoms. We all remember seeing Tom Savage on the field. Of course, we saw Donald Parham this last NFL year. These are clear signs of a concussion: posturing, loss of consciousness, seizure activity, things that you can visibly recognize in the setting of a head impact to say, yes, this is clearly a concussion, no doubt about it. The symptoms are what the athlete describes and experiences: headaches, blurry vision, the ringing in the ears, the flashing lights. That's also part of what can constitute a concussion. And then the fact that this has to be attributed to nothing else. So you can't have some other mechanism for why you have those symptoms. I'm sure a lot of sports medicine doctors would be shocked to hear Farve say thousands of concussions, because oftentimes when we actually label the concussion, it's somebody who has had persistent symptoms. They've come to see us on the sideline. We're concerned based on how they look. But if they just stay in the game like Favre was doing, we may never understand or appreciate it. And so it's really concerning to hear that Brett was experiencing this so darn often, because I don't see how you could say that isn't a concussion. There was impact to the head. He had symptoms. It just didn't last as long as we're typically used to hearing because of the presentation of things. To make this an even harder conversation, oftentimes if we have actually diagnosed an athlete with multiple concussions, especially multiple concussions over the same year, or 4 or 5 over their high school career, we'll start having conversations with them about stopping that sport because of the risk of further concussion. So to hear that somebody was having thousands of these episodes where they had residual symptoms, it's hard to really understand how that fits in this greater scheme of sports medicine and how to think about concussions. It's all really complex, but having more information about these instances, I think, is just better, and raising this awareness is better. So I'm glad that Favre is being honest about this. And again, raising attention to what is a concussion or what is not a concussion. The timing of this is also relevant because just a couple of weeks ago, a paper was published that pretty much definitively says that chronic traumatic encephalopathy, or CTE, is caused by repetitive head impacts and repetitive head trauma. This is really the first time we've gotten this definitive of a connection between what causes CTE. So to then a couple weeks later hear one of the greats of the game saying he feels like he had thousands of concussions definitely raises a lot of concern here, and just further continues this conversation about making the game safer and raising more awareness about these types of head injuries. In summary with all this, I think one of the most important things is for people to realize that you don't have to get knocked unconscious to have had a concussion. And if there's concern you may have had a concussion, you should be properly evaluated and treated as such. Favre continuing to be open about this continues this conversation. It helps younger athletes realize, wow, maybe when I got hit or got my bell rung, as they might say, that truly is a concussion and I should be checked. That's what we need more of in the game. We need more transparency. We need more awareness. If you're an athlete watching this and you have any time in your sport where you get hit in the head, you get some sort of shot where you feel symptoms, you feel funny, you feel your head hurt, you're dizzy, whatever the case may be, please take yourself out of the game if the medical team doesn't see it. Have yourself evaluated, be checked out for these things, because we need to properly manage them and treat them accordingly with all the data coming out about what can happen down the road. That's it for the video, everybody. Let me know as always any questions or comments down below. And until next time, we'll see you later. Bye.